Well, it has been an interesting couple of days in the news cycle, as well as the DNC. And we're going to be going through a lot of different topics, but I think first and foremost, I want to comment on Kamala Harris' excellent plan in order to control prices with government regulation. That is exactly what will work in order to make things better for economy. Because as we all know, throughout all of human history, prices are much better when politicians and bureaucrats, a select group, of course, can control them. And that's what essentially Kamala wants at this point. And even the Washington Post brought out that maybe if your political opponents are saying you've got some communist sympathies, you shouldn't be rolling out price controls as your solution to inflationary monetary policy. But here's the deal. A lot of people look at this. Let's be honest. A lot of people will look at this and say, well, yeah, price controls. Why can't the government tell a greedy business that you got to set the price right here? What are the practical considerations to that? So today on this episode, we're not just going to go through and look some of the crazy comments like, I don't know, watching a woman that owns multiple homes to include ones in Hawaii and is sitting there in I think it was a $3,000 outfit talking about how she's skeptical of people that take more than they need. We're not going to just talk about the funny aspects of this. We're actually going to dig into a little bit of like, okay, what are the practical economic considerations of some of the things being discussed? What are the practical legal considerations of some of the things being discussed? What would it mean for investment? What would it mean for people that are just trying to find a job or buy a home? Because as much as some of this might sound good on a superficial level, it actually has really dire consequences, and it's important for people to understand exactly why. That this isn't just some sort of partisan disagreement, that there really are reasonable, logical considerations on how these policies create perverse incentives that hurt the very people that the same politicians spouting them claim to care about. All right, we're going to talk about all of that and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument. I am your host, Nick Freitas. With me in the studio, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone. I do kind of wonder if Bidenomics is working, and we love Bidenomics. What exactly is there to fix?
Yeah, why do they got to fix everything on day one? That just sounds crazy.
I don't understand. What are you fixing? You were running on this economy. You were proud of this economy.
Well, look,
what exactly are you fixing?
We're gonna go into why, Kamala Harris has promised us that as bad as things are, as soon as she gets into office, she's going to start fixing it. Just as soon as she gets into office. Anyways, we also back in the studio, Mr. Sicky McSicky Pants. Now he's feeling better now. Our resident historian and political prognosticator, Christian Hines. How you doing, bud?
Still recovering from COVID, so I'm actually not feeling fully better, but I'm feeling better enough to be on the podcast today.
He's going to give us also COVIDs.
I don't think we told everybody that it was COVID you had.
I didn't.
I told plenty of people.
You're the one that just straight up HIPAA
COVID.
violation.
That's true.
No, it's okay. It's you.
I told plenty of people on our Minecraft server that.
On the Minecraft server. That's what it was. Is Christian just didn't want to come into work for a few days. He was doing a
too busy building my base.
Okay, so look,
Can I just say that I'm pretty Walls is giving off Howard Dean vibes. Does anybody else see like he is like the modern Howard Dean?
It's like, funny that we're calling that modern, but no. We're gonna get into all of that. Just come on, back it up just a little bit because first and foremost, before we get into today's episode, I got asked a while back if I would be a voice actor. Which yes. I've never particularly liked my voice.
He's good at the accents.
I've never particularly, unfortunately, was not the voice actor for Stalin. Anyway, I did not think I don't like my voice very much, but I got asked to be a voice actor. I agreed, and now we're going to show you all a quick clip, and you guys get to judge. Did I do a halfway decent job here? So let's go ahead and pull this up and see how I did. I don't hear any noise. Oh my gosh. Christian's back. We're gonna give him one alibi for being sick. There we go. All right, go ahead.
Georgie, still eating those pies?
That's not me.
I can eat whatever I want now that I have dentures.
Cheers!
Whoa.
Hello, President Washington, sir.
We've met your painting, but I can't believe we're meeting you in person.
Georgie, these quitters are my grandkids.
Quitters?
Everything went wrong while we were making our movie, and it wasn't as good as we wanted, and people are being mean about it, and we lost all the footage. So yeah, We quit.
I have no idea what half of those words mean, but I do know the feeling.
How? You're George Washington. You're living a legendary life of pure success.
Yes, my life has been revolutionary, but it wasn't all success. Gabriella, mind if we take a trip down memory lane?
Way ahead of you, Georgie. Whoa! A real battle!
This is the battle of the...
Heavens, Gabby, bringing children onto a battlefield?
Sorry! Where is that lousy remote? Grandma, that's mute! No! Pause!
It's rewinding!
No! Pause! Pause!
All right, go ahead and go ahead and pause it right here. All right, so
Nice. I recall that voice from somewhere.
yeah, it goes on. I got some more lines in here, and I get a pretty good speech at the end. But if you want to see that speech, you're gonna have to go over to Tuttle Twins. And in fact, we want to thank Tuttle Twins because not only did they sponsor this, but they've also been good partners with us. In fact, if you go on to Tuttle Twins right now, there's a link in the description. You can get the first box set of all the books that actually go along with the cartoons that they do. And you're going to get it 66% off.
I love that they have so much more now than when our kids were younger. They were just starting off when our kids were younger, and now there's just so many more resources for them.
Here's the thing I want everyone to understand. Whether you're homeschooling, whether you're not homeschooling, doesn't matter. We use Tuttle Twins books for our kids because a lot of the things that we're going to be discussing today are kind of complex concepts and principles about political philosophy, economic theory, all of those things. And the question is always, how do I start to convey these ideas to my kids? And how do I do it at age-appropriate levels? And the Tuttle Twins knocks it out of the park. I enjoy reading it. I enjoyed reading it to my kids. My kids enjoyed reading it. So the whole series goes through everything. Like it explains inflationary monetary policy to kids in a way that they actually enjoy reading, watching, and learning about it. And so I'm gonna tell you right now, try out Tuttle Twins. Go to the link in the description, right? You're gonna get, again, 66% off the season 1 book series when you go to that link. All right, and I'm telling you, just give it a shot. Even if you're not going to go for the full series right up front, right? Maybe you want to try something out. There's a whole book series over there where they talk. There's one called The Law, which if you've heard me talk about Frederick Bastiat and how much I love Frederick Bastiat and his political philosophy and that book, The Law, that he wrote, it's excellent. But they do such a good job of they pick things that are relevant to kids. They pick scenarios, and then they explain it in a way that kids can understand. And what you're teaching your kids at that level is the underlying concept. Right. And because you're setting that foundation as they get older, the books increase with respect to the age appropriate nature of the information that they actually put out. You can start to have these conversations and your kids start to pick up on things. So now when they hear something in a completely different category, they're like, wait a second, that's like this. And it's incredible. It is wonderful. You know, my kids are obviously, very conservative, but 2 of my kids are also theater kids, which means they're constantly in an environment that is not exactly simpatico with conservative ideology. And yet, not only do they do well in that environment, they thrive, they share their ideas with other kids, and they're actually able to convince them because they've learned various mechanisms for discussion, argumentation, and they're able to do it in ways that are culturally relevant, age appropriate. And so I'm a huge fan of the Tuttle Twins. It was a blast being in this series. I'm going to be honest, as someone that is probably going to be a granddad in the next 2 to 3 years, probably going to be a grandpa. I am super stoked that as far as my grandkids are aware, George Washington sounds exactly like granddad. So go to the link in the description. Check out Tuttle Twins. Again, it was a blast to work on this. Also, check out the video series as well. You can just Google Tuttle Twins. It's, again, excellent series. Check out the books. Check out the whole series of books. Check out the cartoon as well. You're going to love it, I promise. Okay.
That's quite fitting for the topic of today's episode.
It
if
is.
you think about it.
It is, because that is one of the major questions that we get from people all the time, is that how do I educate my kids, especially when I'm competing against a lot of times academic institutions, whether they be, everything from elementary school all up to higher ed. How do I set my kids on the right path? And starting early is very, very important. And one of the things that we've talked about before is culture And education is not just what goes on in a classroom. Culture and education is also what takes place when you're listening to music, when your kids are watching cartoons. If you've never sat down, like if you just let your kids watch cartoons, if you've never sat down, I am telling you, they are getting a message about the world you are probably not anticipating. And you, because it never occurs to us that they're going to be pumping our 4-year-old or our 5-year-old full of political ideology, but they do. And so having alternatives, and that's one of the greatest things about this, right, is having alternatives what the mainstream is pushing that actually shares your values, reinforces your values, and does it in a legitimately well done, well made, and funny way. Like if I can sit down and watch the cartoon and think, oh, that's a crack up, that's pretty funny. I caught the sarcasm there. That is a good mixture of something that is, appeals to all ages. I think Tuttle Twins does a great job.
When we seed the culture war,
yeah,
you should not be surprised when you end up getting public support for policies like this one here.
Yes,
I just wanted to do the segue to the first link here because
and somebody asked the question on here, like, what age are they appropriate for? Like, literally, if your kids can read, right? There are Tuttle Twins series for them, and like I said, there's ones that they elevate a little bit more. So the full spectrum.
You can read them to your kids if they can't read yet.
Yeah. It's good. All right, so Washington Post opinion piece. We're going to go with this.
What a
When
headline.
your opponent calls you a communist, maybe don't propose price controls. It's hard to exaggerate how bad Kamala Harris' price gouging proposal is. This comes from the Washington Post. So
granted, it's an opinion piece.
It is an opinion piece, but so let's go into
the fact that they
Crazy
published
because
it.
they're trying to punish businesses for responding to what they've done to money, by printing and printing and printing money.
So let's read this article. Okay. Price gouging is the focus of Vice President Kamala Harris's economic agenda. Her presidential campaign says she'll crack down on excessive prices and excessive corporate profits, particularly for groceries. So what level counts as excessive, you might ask? To be determined, but Harris will ban it. That's the thing about price gouging. Has been said of hardcore pornography. You know it when you see it. It's not hard to figure out where this proposal came from. Voters want to blame someone for higher grocery bills, and the presidential candidates have apparently decided the choices are either the Biden administration or corporate greed. Harris has chosen the latter. So here's what I want people to understand. Harris did something the other day that Trump actually did a pretty good job parodying, and that's where she got on there and she listed all of the different prices of basic consumer goods, grocery-related goods that had gone up exponentially over the last couple of years. And then they will always talk about, and corporate profits are through the roof. The thing that they forget about some of this is that sometimes they don't properly differentiate between profits and revenues. I've seen them do this. They don't properly differentiate. A revenue is how much a company takes in. A profit is how much they actually get to keep at the other end of it. The other side of this is that they don't seem to understand that a lot of times the profit is not always associated with the sales of the particular goods that they're talking about. So for instance, if a large corporation has multiple interests and you engage in inflationary monetary policy and their stock holdings go up significantly, right? You can make the argument that the overall wealth of that company has increased. The problem is that they haven't increased as due to increased productivity, right? They're not increasing because your grocery bill went up. They're increasing because you printed out more dollars. People don't want to hold on to dollars once you're printing them out. Investors don't. And so they buy stock. They put it into assets that can appreciate over time, right? Or they're not as subject to inflation. And a lot of this gets lost in the sauce, because think about this right now. As I'm sitting here explaining, here's all the different ways that inflationary monetary policy causes the prices to go up, right? One of the ways it causes the prices to go up is it makes your dollar worth less. The more money the Treasury just prints out arbitrarily, like, here you go, more money, the less valuable your individual dollar is, because you don't have more goods and services in the marketplace, but you do have more pieces of paper money competing for those goods and services. So the prices go up. The prices lift. That's inflationary monetary policy. That's one of the causes of your prices going up.
It's basically a hidden tax.
It is a hidden tax on savings.
They're basically stealing the value from your money and using it firsthand. And then when it trickles back to you, it has less and less and less value.
Yes.
And so you're basically getting taxed on the back end without it really looking like a tax, and it's the government stealing from you.
It absolutely is. Milton Friedman did a good job of explaining how inflation is a hidden tax. Because again, we talk about there's 3 ways that the government can raise money, right? They can tax it, they can borrow it, or they can print it. And when they print it, it has some of the most disastrous effects possible because a lot of the effects are hidden. They're not as obvious to people. So here's what needs to be understood. Think of how long it took me to just explain that here's all the various ways that inflationary monetary policy can negatively impact the economy and your grocery bill. Now, going through and explaining that actually requires a basic understanding of economics, a basic understanding of how economics operate, or I can just be a politician that goes out there and says, this is all because of corporate greed, and if you elect me, I will punish them for this corporate greed and the negative impact it's having on your groceries. Which one of those seems like a more simpler, dynamic, and forceful position? It's clearly the latter.
Which is insane because the data shows that it's actually not greedy businesses that are driving prices higher.
No.
Look at this chart that I just pulled up. I'm gonna keep shilling Alden until one day I can get you to interview her. So she looked at the profit margin of grocery stores, and this is just one example. This is Kroger, and this chart goes all the way back to the 1980s, and it shows the profit margin of Kroger. They average less than 2% profit margin.
Yeah.
They're currently sitting at 1.43% profit margin. I also looked at the industry average for the grocery store industry, and I'll just pull this one up live right here. This is the profit margin of grocery stores on average, all of them, not just Kroger. The profit margin average is 1.6%. So what this means is for every dollar that is made, quote unquote, at a grocery store, the grocery store itself gets to keep 1.5 pennies off of every dollar that's actually being spent at the grocery store. These are razor thin profit margins. Basically to the point that many grocery stores can barely keep the lights on.
This is also, and again, when you look at issues like raising the minimum wage, a lot of working at checkout or stocking shelves or things like that, these are generally considered more lower skilled labor. They don't require a great deal of education. You can learn the job on the job, right? And so they don't pay as much because the overall value of the labor is not very high. And so what ends up happening is people get these jobs as an entry-level position in order to gain experience, work ethic, in order to demonstrate that they can show up on time, perform tasks. And then over time, they either get more money within that position because now it costs more to replace them than it does to actually just pay them more. Or they move on to a different job now that they have some experience showing that they can be dependent upon, right? But if you drastically increase the cost of those positions to a grocery store that's making a 1.6% profit margin, they're going to say, we're going to replace tellers. We're going to replace people working on the checkout line with automation. Because I don't got to pay, I don't got to worry about the automation people suing me. I don't got to worry about them stealing. I don't got to worry about them, unionizing and trying to destroy. I don't got to worry about any of that. And again, the argument that always comes, and it's a very convincing argument to people that want to be convinced, is no, this is just greed. Okay, can we look at this logically just for a moment? Is it true that grocery stores, along with every other company, corporation, or whatnot, wants to make as much profit as possible? Yes, that's true. Let's just agree that that's true. Let me ask you this question, though. Have you ever met an employee, a laborer, that also didn't want to make as much money as possible?
Right.
The answer is yes. Okay, does that make the laborer greedy? Is the laborer greedy because they want to make as much money as possible for their labor? No, it makes them self-interested. Is the corporation greedy for wanting to make as much profit as possible? No, it makes them self-interested, and it makes their shareholders that make the business possible self-interested. So both parties are self-interested. The question is, how do they achieve those goals? It becomes greedy the moment you decide to engage in nefarious business practices, the moment you decide to defraud people, the moment you decide to treat people horribly. And by the way, I have seen companies treat employees badly. I have seen employees treat companies badly. One of the things that we explained to our kids, all of our kids before they got jobs, was we said, look, I want you to understand something. When you go to get a job, The job doesn't belong to you. The job belongs to the person that created the job through the company. What belongs to you is your labor, your work ethic, your personality, your creativity, your intelligence, and you should go to the business that will pay you the most for those things. But the business has a right to hire the person that will give them the most for what they're paying for. That's the exchange. That's the balance. That's where you get equilibrium. But then when a politician comes in and says, no, we must tip our hands on the scale of one particular group at the expense of another, I guarantee you they are not doing that because they have a good understanding of economics. They are certainly not doing that because of the best interest of laborers in mind. They have the best interest of themselves in mind, because now when they can arbitrarily affect the cost of goods and services, when businesses are scared to death that they might be next on the chopping block or they might be the next target of some sort of government policy, you know who they start giving money to real quick? Politicians. And that's how you need, that is the mind shift that I would like people to have, is understand that when you see people like Kamala Harris getting up there and talking about, I'm going to fix this corporate greed by imposing price controls, two things are going to happen. One, grocery stores, these corporations and everything else are going to start frantically trying to interact with the government, try to curry favor. They're going to try to get exceptions to the rules. They're going to try to get carve-outs within the regulations. They're going to try to get subsidies for certain projects that politicians have come up with. They're going to do all sorts of things that have nothing to do with more efficiently providing you groceries.
Right.
It's going to be all about their survival in the face of political backlash. And that's how politicians like it. Politicians like to be the first person you have to talk to run your business or sustain your business. The second thing that it's going to do is that if it passes, these grocery stores, which can no longer allow the prices of the goods or services they're providing to be reflected by the actual demand in the economy, that can no longer be reflected by shortages in one particular area or being able to adapt in another particular area, what they'll do is they'll start engaging in whatever tactic they can to keep their doors open, or they'll go out of business. So the first thing that they'll do is they have to cut costs in other areas. If it costs me $1 to buy an item, and now I'm not allowed to sell it to you for more than $9, I'm going to stop carrying that item. Or what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy the item and I'm going to cut the quantity in half. You know, we talk about shrinkflation.
Mm-hmm. They're trying to end shrinkflation too, though. I think they're probably going to have a per pound or a per item.
But this is the problem. This is the whole point, right? Is that once again, when shrinkflation takes place, you get mad at the company, right? For obvious reasons. Like, why am I paying the same amount for less product? Well, it's because it costs more to produce that amount. And then all of a sudden, if the government comes in and says, you're not allowed to charge this much for this, well, I can either stop carrying it, or I can reduce the amount that's involved, or I can cut additional costs associated with getting that. So I can cut my labor costs. I can fire people and turn them into kiosks, right? Again, understand that everybody, not just companies, everybody operates off of incentive structures. Politicians operate off of incentive structures. Companies work, laborers work off them. If the government just starts arbitrarily setting prices, right? The reason why they're calling this communist is because within a communist economy, you don't have the same mechanism for achieving prices. I don't think most people know this. Soviet planners in the Soviet Union were actually pulling up the Sears Roebuck catalog to try to figure out what the prices should be for goods and services in their country. That's right. A communist country was relying on a capitalist country in order to try to figure out what the prices are. Because here's what prices are in reality. Prices are not just a sticker a company puts on a good or a service. A price is a reflection. It's an indication within the larger economy of what is desired and how many resources there are available to actually meet that desire. And so it fluctuates. Sometimes, certain seasons, certain times of life, right? Number 2 pencils are not in a great deal of demand in June, but they're in huge demand in August and September. Why? Back to school. You got to buy a bunch of number 2 pencils. You got to buy an extra pen. All of a sudden, you have an influx.
I'm going to get in on the number 2 pencils options market.
But do you see what I'm saying, right? There are certain. So did all of a sudden, when more pencils become available or whatever, did all of a sudden everyone just get greedy, or was there higher demand for something? If that demand was properly anticipated, then more supply comes out and you can keep prices low. But
prices are a signal
Yes.
to producers on how much to produce and to consumers on how much they can afford
Yes.
to consume. And the problem with socialism and communism ultimately boils down to two things: the knowledge problem and the economic calculation problem.
Yeah.
And the Austrian school, believe it or not, actually came up with these concepts. Long story short, the TLDR, and we did a Y Minute on this recently that should be going out soon, is that the issue is when you monopolize everything in the hands of the state, you actually eliminate prices.
Yeah.
Because there's no competition. Now there's a
You-
lot more nuance
You
to
eliminate
this,
prices
but
as we understand
you
them.
eliminate market-based prices.
Yes.
Because the state now gets to set what the price of a good or service is. But that's actually a problem, because when the state is the one that's setting the prices rather than the people actually consuming the products or people that are demanding the goods, what you end up inevitably getting is shortages.
Yes.
This is how in the Soviet Union you had a shortage of toilet paper, you had a shortage of basic consumer goods right before the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was commonly said in the late 1980s that specialty items, items like clothing for women or for children, were in constant chronic shortage. And the reason why was because the factories that were all run by the state were constantly producing giant men's-sized large coats and shoes and socks and shirts and pants. And the reason why was because the quotas that they were having to fill were built around the weight of the cloth that they were producing. So it was simply, well, we're just going to make massive coats then in order to meet this month's quota. And so if you were a consumer who was shorter than the average Russian, or if you were a woman, or if you were shopping for a child, and you needed something that was specifically tailored to that demographic, there were no products for you because there was no marketplace to meet that specialty demand. Instead, they were meeting government-based quotas rather than what the marketplace was demanding. And the reason why was because there were no prices. There were no market-based prices.
Well, and to give everyone an idea, we've tried this in the United States under a Republican. Richard Nixon decided we had an oil crisis in the Middle East. So what happened? The supply of oil went down, but the demand continued to rise. That means prices go up every single time. It's not magic. It's logic.
Was
All
this
right?
the time when you had your license plate number was, so you were an even or
you
odd
could
days?
if you had an even number license plate, you could go on certain days to get gas. And you had an odd number, you can go on others. Why? In part because they were fixing people were mad about the increased price of gasoline. And instead of explaining this is a supply and demand issue based off of what's going on, we have to increase the supply. That could mean more drilling in the United States. It could mean looking for other markets for oil. It could mean resolving the conflict over in the Middle. It could mean anything. But what you need, the way to hit higher prices, is to increase supply of the thing in demand every single time. That's how you do it. There's no magic. There's no government formula. Increase the supply. You will cause the prices to go down as a result, or to stabilize. All right. What the government decided to do is we're not going to increase the supply, but we're going to set the price at a certain amount. And so companies, if you're an oil company and I can't get what I actually need in order to sell the product, do I sell the product at a loss? No, I stop selling.
You
right?
get shortages
Or I get shortages of the product. If I'm a gas station, this is another one where I love, because they'll talk about record profits, and the way they'll manipulate it is they'll talk about like month by month, right, or quarter by quarter. Well, here's the deal. If I'm a gas station, right, and I've got to buy oil to go, or I've got to buy gasoline to go into my pumps, right? Do I charge you a percentage based off of what I paid for it, or do I charge you a percentage based off of what I think I'm going to have to spend in order to replenish my supply? I have to take into account what I think the price of gasoline is going to be in next quarter. Because if I charge you this rate right now based off of this price, and then all of a sudden the prices go up, and I can't afford to buy the same amount of gasoline, I cannot sell you gas anymore. If you show up to my gas station and I don't have gas, the likelihood that you will return to my gas station diminishes significantly. So I, as an entrepreneur, and this is the role entrepreneurs play within the economy, they're the ones managing the risk factors that you don't ever have to think about. You show up, your gas is there. Maybe you like the price, maybe you don't, but you didn't have to factor in anything with respect to what it was going to cost you to replenish supply, or pay your taxes, or manage your overhead, or your property, or your employees, or anything. They do all of that, but they have to anticipate, you know what, next month, because of what's going on in the Middle East, oil prices are going to go up, which means gas prices are going to go up, which means if I don't charge more right now, I won't be able to replenish supply. But according to the politician, they're like, they bought it at this price and now they're selling it at this price because they're making record profits. Yeah, if you're a moron, that works as an argument.
Well, here's
or if you're a very, very disingenuous politician that's trying to curry favor.
It does seem that this is something across the board. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on. It's really popular to hate the rich. It's really popular to hate big business or hate the oil companies are getting rich, and they're charging us so much. I hear the left and the right both make the exact same arguments, as if it's the companies that are doing all of this and not, it's like just a fundamental misunderstanding of inflationary monetary policy and also exorbitant regulation in different areas. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I had to go to California to help my family with a surgery that was going on out there. And I went to fill up my dad's Honda in Chico, California, and it was almost $6 a gallon. It cost me more to fill up his Honda than it cost us to fill up our F-250 here in Virginia.
Well, like Christian, there's a video, there's an image I just sent you in Slack that I want you to bring up here in a second.
Okay.
Because this does a great job of illustrating the problem. Because there are some people that go, wait a second, you're not telling me these corporations don't share any of the blame? No. Many of them do share some of the blame. Many of them are a part of the problem. But there needs to be an important distinction here.
Give me a minute.
And the important distinction is it's not rich versus middle class versus poor. It's how did you become rich? How did you become middle class? How did you become poor? Right? If you got rich by doing an excellent job of providing goods and services that people voluntarily paid you for, well, then guess what? I'm glad you're rich because we're now encouraged. We voluntarily chose to make you rich, not because we liked you, but because you were doing something that made our lives better. And I'm not owed anything by the fact that you got wealthy based off of providing things that people want. But instead, the left just categorize, if you're rich, if you're wealthy, then somehow you were evil or you were mean or you were greedy. And that's the only thing that explains why you're rich. And if you were poor, it's because you're disadvantaged. Look at this screen. I love this right here. This is excellent. So this comes from Wrong Enemy, Right Enemy, and it shows two blocks. And if you look closely, it's the exact same block. It's the exact same block. It says rich and then non-rich. And then what it does is it shows the difference between earners, entrepreneurs, and protectors versus predators, cronies, and rent seekers. So the people that are going to the government, the corporation that goes to the government to subsidize their business or to make new regulations in order to prevent people from competing with them, they're part of the problem, right? The person that is stealing from their boss at work, right? Or taking time or like lying about, whatever and not actually giving the full benefit of what they're paid to do. They're part of the problem. The person that refuses to work, right? Not because there aren't opportunities, but because they just haven't found the one they really want and then takes money out of the system as a result, as a net recipient of tax subsidies through welfare or whatever. That's part of the problem. The poor person working really, really hard to make ends meet, that's not the problem. The middle class person that puts in an honest day's labor for an honest day's wage, that's not the problem. The wealthy person that gets wealthy because they provide goods and services that we all appreciate, and so we voluntarily gave them the money, that's not the problem. But what's been on display at the DNC from some of the most hypocritical people I've ever heard in my life has been, I'm going to separate you into the good guys and the bad guys. And the bad guys are the wealthy guys. Forget the fact that if you look at some of the wealthiest corporate donors in the country, they're all throwing their money at Democrats. Why? Is it because they just suddenly became altruistic? They're not the greedy ones, they're the good ones? Or is it because they know that in a system where the government's going to be setting prices, the government's going to be pulling out a whole new host of regulations, they know that if they have the inside track, they're going to get to help write those regulations. They're going to get the exceptions to the rule, just like Panera did in California. Minimum wage is now $25 unless you bake bread on your site. Gosh, how did Panera get that special carve out? Is it because there's something uniquely special about baking bread? Or is it because Panera is a huge donor to Gavin Newsom? That's what this crap is. It's cronyism. So,
there's another historical example that is quite fitting for what Kamala Harris is proposing, and it is the Emperor Diocletian.
Yeah. We do it. Christian's back, baby.
Christian's
we went
back.
to Rome. We got to Rome.
Nick,
Obscure historical references.
This is not
incoming.
obscure. This is
No.
actually not obscure. The Edict on the Maximum of Prices. Diocletian, long story short, probably one of the absolute worst Roman emperors ever, despite the fact that he is the Roman FDR. This guy's usually lumped in with like Constantine and the five good emperors is, oh man, he did all this incredible work to stabilize the empire after the crisis of the 3rd century. No, this dude's stealing all the credit that Aurelian really honestly deserves. And in many respects destroys the Roman economy and lays the foundations for feudalism.
Yeah.
Because the Roman state was not a feudal state until Diocletian. The Roman state was also not in some ways a totalitarian state. It was authoritarian, but it wasn't totalitarian. I think there actually is a distinction between those two until Diocletian. It's Diocletian that comes along and says, like, I am your lord.
Yeah.
Right? It's also Diocletian who comes along and says, you know, we've been doing too much money minting here. Money smelter's been going burr for the last couple centuries.
Money smelter.
And, you know, rather than no longer debase the currency, I'm just going to tell producers that you're the problem.
Yeah.
You've been selling your prices for too much, rather than the fact that, you know, the currency has completely lost all value over the last century. And so he issues this edict where he basically tells people across the entire empire, you're not allowed to sell things like bread, or you're not allowed to sell plots of land, or you're not allowed to sell fruits and vegetables or wagon wheels or just anything you can imagine higher than a certain price. And that went about as well as you could possibly imagine. It was literally almost overnight that the Roman economy collapsed, like fully collapsed, and went into a black market bartering system. Rather than, like, it was so complicated that people were having to revert to bartering outside of the purview of the government in order to get goods or services exchanged, rather than using the Roman currency. Because what Diocletian basically did was made it illegal for you to use the Roman currency, because if you sold things for what the market was actually demanding, what producers could actually afford to sell them at, you were going to be taking a loss to do so. And so by forcing this edict on the entire empire, what he basically did was he reverted the economy away from a modern, at the time, right? We're still talking 1700 years ago. But he reverted the economy away from a modern system into what was basically the precursor to the feudal system that Europe ended up having during the Middle Ages.
No, it's fascinating to point out that it gets so bad that it'll start with price fixing, because politicians with no understanding of how prices work or what they actually do within the economy believe they can just fix it at a certain rate and people will just deal with it. Well, no, I'm not going to sell you stuff at a loss. I'm not going to sell you something that it costs me more to produce than it does to sell. Why would I do that? That makes no sense. So what ends up happening? You have a black market. I've gotten to this point before. Whenever they talk about like anti-price gouging or price fixing, here's what you need to hear, because here's what's actually going on. They're going to tell you this is all about lowering prices. They're going to tell you this is all about getting you goods and services for affordable rates. Here's all it does. It makes it illegal to sell you something at a price you agree to if it goes above a certain amount. That's what it does. That's all it does. That's all these policies actually do. They make it illegal. I did this once when I was explaining the minimum wage. Like, oh, we're going to increase the minimum wage in Virginia to $13 an hour, despite the fact that we have some counties in Virginia where the median annual income is under $30,000, and we have other counties in Virginia that are the wealthiest in America. We're going to have this. We're going to set the same minimum wage for both of these areas and expect equal results. And she said, this is going to make it easier for people to live on a, with one job and spend more time with their families. And I said, really? Because I'm looking at your bill and there's nothing in here written into code that says you're going to get to spend more time with your families. You're going to be able to live more. You're going to be able to afford more. Here's the only thing your bill does. Ready for it? Here's the only thing your bill does. It will now be illegal for me to offer someone a job for $12.99 an hour. There you go. I'm now a criminal if I offer someone a job for $12.99 an hour in a county where the average median income is $30,000 a year. That's what you've done, you great altruistic, kind human being. Have you ever been to that county? No. Do you know the circumstances of the people in that county? No. Do you know the entrepreneur offering the job? No. Do you know the person seeking the job? No. Did any of them ask you to intervene in this transaction? No. What you are is arrogant and self-righteous. And quite frankly, stupid, because you don't understand basic elements of a voluntary transaction.
It's actually, I think it's even worse than that. I also would add that they're dangerous.
It's nefarious.
They're dangerous.
Nefarious at this point.
And they're dangerous because policies like price controls of any sort, gasoline, rent, groceries now.
We actually have that in Virginia. If you ever look at buying milk, it'll say, sold above the state minimum. Like, you are not allowed to sell milk for too cheap.
So the real danger of all of this stuff related to price fixing or price gouging laws is that what you inevitably end up seeing is that politicians are basically trying to create money out of thin air, but they're trying to not pay the consequences for creating money out of thin air. Because as Milton Friedman identified, inflation is always a monetary phenomenon. The reason that you're seeing price increases to begin with is not because, as you brought up earlier, it wasn't because corporations woke up one day, the rich woke up one day and decided, man, I'm going to be greedy today.
We're not being greedy enough.
Why were they not greedy in 2019?
Yeah.
The reason was because the Federal Reserve printed trillions of dollars and injected it into the real estate market, the stock market, and bought trillions of dollars worth of bonds. That way the federal government could bribe us all with $1,400 stimulus checks while keeping the rest of the money for themselves. And so what inevitably happened was you had an increase in the money supply. But you didn't see a similar increase in the number of goods and services being produced. You didn't see trillions of dollars worth of new homes being constructed.
Yeah.
And so what you inevitably ended up seeing was the price of everything went up because the money supply went up. But that's not good enough for the politicians because they need the money supply to go up so that way they can spend it on gender programs in Pakistan. And so therefore, the only way that you can actually get the benefits of increasing the money supply without paying the consequences of increasing the money supply, which again is an increase in prices, an increase in the cost of goods and services, even goods and services that the government itself is procuring, is you implement price controls. You basically, or you implement something known as financial dominance, where you use coercive mechanisms in order to basically force people. Ultimately, the way that it ends is you use coercive mechanisms in order to force people to buy things like bonds.
Yeah.
In order to funnel money into the government for it to spend, even if the people that are buying the bonds are actually taking a loss on it.
Yeah.
And I mean, the end result of that is actually debt monetization, because you can force the central bank to buy bonds at a loss because it's the central bank. You can tell them to do whatever they want because they're an instrument of the state itself. But where this ends is it ends with shortages, it ends with rationing, and eventually ends with total economic collapse because at the end of the day, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah.
And this applies for the government itself. You cannot create money out of thin air. Money is a representation of wealth.
Yeah.
And wealth doesn't just exist. It doesn't pop into existence via quantum mechanics. Wealth is created.
Yeah.
Wealth is invented. Wealth comes about when people make things.
Yeah.
Wealth doesn't come about by manipulating monetary policy. But you have a lot of people that, especially in government, that think that's how you can get wealth. And that's a very dangerous thing because that can destroy empires.
For them, that is how they can get wealth.
Yeah, that's true. Them controlling the thing is excuse me, how they do it. All right, let's get to some super chats here. Frogger251, Nick, former frog here, retired in 22 due to mandates. First of all, thank you for your service, and it sucks that you had to get out over that. 3 points. Who should be in Trump's cabinet? When are you running for governor, and how can I help? All right, let me start with when am I running for governor. I have zero plans to run for governor, but thank you very much. When it comes to who should be in Trump's cabinet, I would say this. Obviously, there's a lot of names that could get thrown out there for different positions. The only people I want in a Trump cabinet, especially when it comes to the federal bureaucracy and various agencies, are people whose sole mission is to drastically reduce, make more efficient, and add transparency to those organizations. If they don't go in there with that mindset, I don't care how capable they are. I don't care how successful they've been. I don't care how well they speak. If they are not going in there with the specific purpose of reducing the overall size and power of the federal bureaucracy, they shouldn't be anywhere near a cabinet position. Right? That's what I would say. There's been talk now about RFK Jr. What if he dropped out? What if he endorsed Trump? If they want to give RFK Jr. the FDA, I'll sign off on that. He seems pretty hostile to him. I'll take that. The other one is how can you help? I will say this much. Look, we talk a lot about various ways that you help on politics and everything else in your community. The first and foremost is always like, again, be the sort of man you want your son to be the sort of man that your wife can depend on, and that goes, in reverse for women. When it comes to politics specifically and voting or getting involved, here's what I would say. if you're someone watching this podcast, chances are you're the political friend within your friend group, which means you've probably got 5 to 10 to maybe 15 other people who think the way you do, have the same values that you do, but they're not as engaged in politics. Find those friends and make sure they vote, because you'd be shocked at how many of them don't. You'd be shocked at how many of them just ignore it. And you can actually have a massive impact by just convincing people, like, look, sign up, vote early, whatever you need to do, but just do it. So I would just encourage you to do that. All right, let's move to another one. Tyler, thank you very much for the super chat. Do you think Google's manipulation of headlines and scrubbing of negative press regarding Kamala's amounts to election interference?
Yes.
Okay, so here's the deal. As Americans, we're allowed to actually try to, engage in operations which we think will manipulate, or not manipulate's maybe a strong word, which we think will influence in one direction or another. Here's what makes organizations like Google different, right? Google's supposed to be a platform, right? That's how they get special legal protections. Because if they were a publisher, they could be sued for things like libel. But they can't, because they're just a platform. And yet they're deliberately engaging, I think, in manipulation, the sort of manipulation you talk about, in order to achieve a particular political result. I think once you start doing that, you start moving into the realm of a publisher. And I really think that, again, if Trump gets into office, I think we need to look at some of these big tech companies and we say, look, we don't expect you to advertise or to operate in such a way as to benefit us. We do expect you to operate and advertise and run yourself in accordance with what legal protections you're getting under the code section that you maintain. And if you're not going to do that, there will be consequences. That's not us saying do what we want or we'll support us or we'll punish you. That's what Democrats are doing. That's us saying, no, you have to play by the rules that have been established. If you're going to be a platform, be a platform. Stop trying to manipulate algorithms in order to achieve certain political outcomes or ideological outcomes. If you want to do that, then here's what you do. You immediately move into a different section. You say that's what you do, and then you do it. There you go. Easy enough. And then the second thing goes, putting a 25% unrealized capital gain tax is as commie as it gets. We're going to get into this a little bit later, because you're right. This is a huge problem when people talk about the wealth tax. Elizabeth Warren loves to talk about this. Bernie Sanders.
The whole unrealized gains is
absurd. I mean, you would essentially be getting taxed on a gain, on a money that you have not received yet, right? So it is bad for all sorts of reasons, but it is very, very easy to manipulate people in the public by saying, oh my gosh, you'll say this all the time. Elon Musk is worth this much, but he only paid this much in taxes. Well, yeah, he paid taxes on income. He paid taxes on capital gains. He paid taxes on property. But nobody gets taxed based off of their overall wealth, right? Nobody. The middle class, Elon Musk's secretary, they do not go into Elon Musk's secretary house and says, how much is this worth? How much is that? How much is that piece of artwork worth? How much is your stock portfolio worth? How much is your 401k worth? We're going to tax you based off of all of that, even though you haven't cashed out your 401k, even though you haven't sold that piece of artwork, even though you haven't actually realized any gain. We're going to tax you simply because you currently own it. That is a horrible idea. They've done this over in Europe. What ended up happening was a lot of people that actually had money to invest de-invested from their country and then moved and invested somewhere else. Because why would I invest in a country that's going to punish me for investing? Right? You're already going to tax me on the money I made in order to invest. You're going to tax me again when I cash in on that investment. But now if I hold the money in the investment, you're going to tax me there too? You're going to force me to sell the product that I've invested in, the stock I've invested in, the company that's using that money to hire people and buy capital equipment. You're going to force me to sell it in order to give the government more money, and you think this is a good idea, right? It's just absurd.
And it never goes the other way around. If you have just massive gains, they're right there with their hand out, ready to take your money. But if you have massive losses, it's crickets for the government. In fact, they still want as much money as possible on the other end. I'll never forget the people losing their homes in the Paradise fires and the government standing right there ready to cash in on their insurance payout to try to replace their home.
Yeah.
Insane.
Matthew Cooper, is the announcement the Fed will be cutting rates going to essentially screw us? It's going to be problematic because inflation hasn't been totally worked out of the economy. But the real issue is the Fed itself. The real issue is the monetary policy that we have. So I don't think that the Fed cutting interest rates by a percentage point is going to just spiral the whole economy. I think what you're going to see is you're going to see an artificial bump within the stock market. You might see an artificial bump with respect to people maybe qualifying for home loans now that they wouldn't have been, or that they wouldn't have sought out before because the rates were higher. But essentially, it's going to cause problems. It's not going to fix anything because nothing about that move is directed at addressing the underlying issues that are impacting the economy. Ethereal. Dude, I'm sorry. All right. I'm a new educator that would like to teach about politics, economics in the right way. What is your quick advice and how can I interview for information and insights? Well, I will tell you this. We have our community chat in Circle. That's an area where members of our community get to talk to me, ask me questions more. We try to be a little bit more, we try to be responsive in there and, have more, deep conversations with people on specific questions they have. So that would be a great place to do it. The Tuttle Twins that I mentioned before, I know that sounds convenient because obviously, I just did something with them. We've done a project with them and an ad with them. But honestly, I have been using Tuttle Twins materials for probably over 10 years now. Mm-hmm. And so this isn't something where I just got this yesterday and now I'm saying, oh, this is a great product. I've believed in it for 10 years and now I'm working with them. But they really do provide very good age-appropriate materials out there. There's a lot of other stuff as well, but that would be one that I would recommend. Okay, I think we have a couple more here. Curious question: if Harris wins and goes full-fledged communist, how long would it take for what happened in the Soviet Union to happen here? So understand, very, very different conditions with respect to what took place in the Soviet Union in the early 20th century versus what's going on in the United States right now. It would look very different. It would affect us in similar ways, but it would take a lot more time. And the problem is that the problem for the people that would like to push more of a Marxist view of the world is that they're going to have to contend with states, right? They're going to have to contend with a federalized system instead of what you had over in Tsarist Russia in 1919, right? In 1918. So there's going to be differences. She does not have the ability to just go like full communist like Lenin or Stalin did. That would take a great deal of violence. There would be an incredible amount of pushback. So what they're going to do is they're going to continue to do what they have been doing, which is the Antonio Gramsci approach. And that is not violent overthrow of the current system. That is the long march through the institutions. It's more and more control over, institutions of popular culture, right? So education, arts, entertainment, the bureaucracy, which they kind of already control. They kind of already control these, but they're going to, and that's why you're starting to see them use them in ways that they never would have dreamed of using them 10 or 15 years ago. That's why you're starting to see more lawfare take place now, where they're actively using things like the DOJ to go after their political enemies, right? They're actively using elementary school in order to push certain ideologies. And so that's what you're going to see happening. What they're essentially trying to do is create a culture which creates the sort of citizens that want the thing that they're pushing. And when they feel like they've reached a critical mass there, that's when they'll become more comfortable with everything from, legal recourse to violent recourse against anybody that doesn't get on board. Gabriella, thank you. No question, but a super chat. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. And then another super chat, Nick for President 2028. You can't make me. All right, let's move on to the. Let's move on to the next one.
Did you ask or did you answer the question from Yankee Stacking about thoughts on gold and silver?
I didn't. Read that one for me.
Excellent stream. We are awash in economic ignorance and an infatuation with big government on both sides of the aisle now. Yeah. What's your opinion on physical gold and silver?
So here's the deal with it. There's fiat currency is just paper money, right? And then commodity-based
paper money that's not backed by anything.
Not backed by anything. Yeah, thank you. Fiat currency is paper money not backed by anything other than the full faith and credit of whatever government institution.
Which I have no full faith or credit in.
Exactly. Commodity-based currencies is something like gold or silver. I actually think there's a lot of value to this. Now, again, when you say the gold standard or the silver standard or whatever it is, a lot of people will try to caricature that out of ignorance and say, "Oh, are you gonna carry gold bricks around in order to pay for the?" No, you're gonna carry paper money around. But the paper money will be a receipt for something that has actual intrinsic value that is also scarce, right? This is there's like 5 characteristics of currency. It's got to be divisible. It's got to be acceptable. It's got to be valuable. It's got to be what's the other word I'm thinking of? There's 2 other criteria I can't think of off the top of my mind. But if you think about it, the reason why gold coins or silver coins were so popular for a long time is because they had value in and of itself. Silver could be used for things. Gold could be used for things. And because everyone appreciated that fact and reality, they would accept it as a medium of exchange.
They were also durable. They didn't rust
Durable,
or corrode.
thank you. Durability. That was the other one I was looking for. And then I think there's one more
And they were also relatively malleable. And so
Yeah.
like gold, gold's somewhat flexible. You can
Yeah.
turn it into
Turn it
coins
into
relatively
coins.
easily.
So you can do the same thing with paper, right? But when you have paper money, and the way paper money got started is that you had a bank or you had someone that would hold onto your gold for you. Like, hey, I got a bunch of gold. I'm going on a trip. I don't want to carry all the gold with me. And so they would hold the gold for you for a small price, and they'd give you a receipt for it. Well, now that receipt can actually work as money, right? Because if you're holding the receipt, and if I got the receipt and I go on a trip and I say, all right, I want to buy something, and so I've got, 100 gold in the bank.
Note.
100 gold in the game.
Right.
I'm now going to give you a note for 1 thing of gold for whatever I'm buying. And now when you go to that bank, you can recover that gold instead of me recovering that gold. So I've transferred ownership of that which is already in the bank for something else, right? So you can come up with a system where the currency that you use is tied to something that has real value and that can't just be arbitrarily created out of thin air. And that is what we call sound money. It's paper, it's a currency that is backed by something that has real value. And when you move to sound currency, what ends up happening is you get very, very stable prices, both with respect to the currency, and you end up with stable prices with respect to goods and services, because one of the big reasons why goods and services fluctuate in cost is not just because of supply and demand issues, it's because of the government just printing out paper money and then throwing it out into the marketplace. And so, no, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of good literature on this. I'm a big fan of the Austrian school. The Chicago School of Economics has kind of a different version that they would like to run this. And I think some of it is they're looking at it from the practical consideration that they don't think you're going to get rid of the Federal Reserve. So what's a better way that we could run this? And they have an equation that they like to use. But I still like the idea of commodity backed currency. And again, it's not some weird, crazy idea. It's how currency operated for thousands upon thousands of years. What we're doing now is the crazy thing in history that's leading to so much problems. So don't let anybody like mock you. But people just need to be better informed on what this actually means. All right, we got some other things to move to. Now, one thing I want to talk about here is this whole idea of price gouging versus, she's saying that we're gonna fix prices, and she's, oh no, we're not fixing prices in every area. We're just preventing price gouging. Now, keep in mind, if you engage in inflationary monetary policy, the prices of everything goes up.
The government's price gouging
Because the overall value of your dollar has decreased. And so if you're saying, no, we're just going to do price gouging, but you continue to engage in this sort of activity, it's going to look like everybody's price gouging. So I want to run this video real quick. And this is Thomas Sowell, because typically in people's minds, here's what they think. They think a hurricane comes into town and wipes out a bunch of houses, and then people have to leave their houses and they have to go to a hotel, or they have to buy 2x4s, or they have to buy, plywood to put over their windows. And the greedy people at the construction store at Lowe's or Home Depot, those greedy businesses increase the price of the 2x4s and the plywood. Those greedy hotels end up charging more for individual rooms. Thomas Sowell did a great job of explaining this, and we actually did a Y Minute on it. So we're going to show you this Y Minute to kind of illustrate when a politician says price gouging, all right, we need to understand this within the proper context, because it's easy to just demonize the price gouger, right? And you may have a case where somebody is legitimately engaging in activity which is mean or greedy or nefarious, but not everything categorized as price gouging is greedy, mean, or nefarious. Sometimes there's very, very practical reasons. So we're just going to play this quick 3-minute video that kind of illustrates this point. Go ahead, Christian.
Did you know that 15 years ago, economist Thomas Sowell proved how price gouging laws were a net negative for, wait for it, disaster victims? Now, I know this sounds completely counterintuitive. After all, Doesn't it seem a little bit obtuse to be praising someone for taking advantage of people who may have just lost everything? But Seoul was able to demonstrate that it may be lawmakers who are creating a worse problem than the gas station, hotel, or grocery store owners. Let's use the example Seoul used 15 years ago when Florida was struck by a hurricane. Charlie left over $11 billion in damage across Florida, leaving many residents in the Tampa Bay area with severe shortages of things like gas, housing, and basic consumer goods. A hotel room shot up from $40 a night to over $100, and many Floridians were outraged. Critics, including the state's own governor, called it price gouging, while Florida's attorney general at the time wrote an op-ed slamming Thomas Sowell. So what exactly did Sowell say that caused such outrage? Well, he suggested that Florida's anti-price gouging laws were helping to make the state's shortages in gas, housing, and consumer goods even worse than they otherwise would have been. Sowell pointed out that while it's easy for politicians to demonize a hotel, gas station, or grocery store for charging more in a crisis, it's important to remember that the costs associated with supply and demand are not automatically suspended during a disaster. With more demand and less supply, prices naturally go up. This isn't necessarily because people are mean, it simply reflects the reality on the ground. But Sowell really made people mad when he suggested that this temporary increase in prices could actually serve a purpose. Now, before you throw something at the screen, hear him out. For instance, when a hotel raises its rates, it's because the rooms are in higher demand. If the prices stay the same, a family of 4 might decide to get 2 rooms instead of 1. But with the higher rate, they're incentivized to only get 1 room for their family, and now another room becomes available for another family in need. And it's not just hotel rooms. Rising prices for goods incentivizes other people to work to make those goods available. For example, John Stossel reported that in response to Hurricane Katrina, a man bought 19 generators, rented a U-Haul, and drove 600 miles to an area of Mississippi that had been left without power following the hurricane in order to sell the generators. He ended up being arrested, his generators confiscated, and the people who wanted to buy them couldn't. Now, think about that for a second. In a time of crisis, the authorities spent time and resources throwing someone in jail for selling generators to people who needed them and at a price they were willing to pay. The lack of supply led to an increase in price, which motivated someone to go out of their way to meet that demand. Now, you may be thinking that he should have donated them, and that certainly would have been generous, but here's my question. Did the politicians that threw him in jail do that? And if not, who was actually helping more in that moment? The guy making a profit, providing something that people needed, or the politicians moralizing about it?
Yeah,
Nice.
I really like that video. Cody did a good job on that, editing that. Here's what I'll say. Again, the problem is that when you just look at the superficial point, when you just look at the frustration that's experienced by somebody in that moment, it becomes very easy to want to demand a simple government solution that just transfers the cost onto somebody else. The end result always is bad economic policy. Bad economic policy, which negatively impacts not only the people that maybe you don't care if they're negatively impacted because you think they're greedy business owners, it ends up affecting the very consumers that you claim to want to help. The question is none of this is a secret. None of this is strange. Thomas Sowell was talking about this decades ago. Other people were talking about this centuries ago. So why is it that the idea persists? One, sometimes really bad policy is the easiest to explain, because it serves that emotional feeling, that visceral reaction we have right off the bat. And that's another Thomas Sowell quote, is that it doesn't do a lot of good to talk reason and logic to somebody that is enjoying a position of moral superiority in their ignorance. And that's exactly what's going on with a lot of people. But with politicians, here's what I want you to consider. Is it just that they're that horribly economically illiterate, or do they understand that the more legislation you pass, the more everyone becomes dependent on the very people that hold positions of political power? If your business, the prices of your groceries, the car you drive, if all of that is ultimately dependent upon who holds political office, then all of a sudden the importance of politicians within our day-to-day lives increases exponentially and in a way that was never supposed to be the reality of the United States. There's a reason why they want this amount of control. And they're always going to tell you it's for your benefit, but I'll tell you who it always benefits: them. Sometimes it might benefit you. If you happen to be the crony whose back gets scratched that day, if you happen to be the voting demographic who that day is going to get the check in the mail, you might be thinking, hey, better than nothing. But I'll tell you who always wins in that scenario. It's the politicians that now have the control to be able to pick who wins and who loses based off of how much they help that politician. All right.
I'll tell you why politicians are always pushing ideas like this. It's because we increasingly live in a majoritarian democracy.
Yeah.
And political power now increasingly rests in the hands of people who, quite frankly, they don't understand the consequences of these policies.
Yeah.
They sound good on paper, and so therefore they vote for people who promise them, because what we have equated politicians with are problem solvers.
Yes.
and they're...
Well, and they do. They have a big problem they want to solve. How do they get reelected, and how do they accumulate more power?
And
That's the problem they want to solve.
And that totally brings us to the third thing that we have on the list, and that is that at the DNC,
this might be my favorite.
They actually said that if Trump is reelected, he's going to use the DOJ. He's going to weaponize the FBI.
Oh my God! Could you
against
imagine?
his enemies.
Could you imagine in America somebody weaponizing the DOJ to go after their political opponents? I've never heard of such a thing. Let's go ahead and look at this speech, though. Let's see what she had to say.
I just can't, like, does nobody see that that's exactly what's been going on under this
hang
DOJ?
on. Before we draw conclusions, I have not actually heard this clip yet.
Let's hear her out.
Let's hear her out.
I think that's exactly what we should do.
All right, go.
But what it means is that under Project 2025, Donald Trump would be able to weaponize the Department of Justice to go after his political opponents. He could even turn the FBI into his own personal police force.
Oh my gosh.
Lady, I'm already voting for Trump. You don't need to give me more reasons to do so.
It's exactly what they are doing. I'm looking at that and I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Let's put people in charge that'll actually, let's go ahead.
Yeah.
Let's let them feel exactly what they've been doing to our people for the past 3 years, actually arguably much longer than that, because they pretty much were targeting Trump subversively throughout his entire term as well. And so, I mean, when's the last time you saw the FBI kick in a former president's door?
Well,
We actually have people here in Culpeper getting slammed by the DOJ. We had a sheriff who pushed back against the gun legislation stuff and the anti-gun stuff. And what happened? DOJ kicks in his door.
We also had
we recently had somebody, we really like yesterday or the day before, like 12 black SUVs show up with full tactical gear to arrest a guy based off of stuff from January 6th. Now, keep in mind, he didn't enter the building. He didn't enter the Capitol. But they have video footage, and they're now saying that, no, they're accusing him of violent acts and the whole deal. This is a guy that served combat tours over in Iraq and Afghanistan, had really overcome like PTSD issues and everything else. Apparently went up to D.C. and because he has a friend that was doing a podcast, and so he was like recording some of it for him and whatnot. Again, they didn't go into the Capitol.
I was going to say that the FBI, the Department of Justice and the FBI are literally arresting and throwing people in prison who did not walk into the Capitol. They didn't break anything. They didn't break any laws.
They didn't hurt
no
anybody.
laws whatsoever. And yet they're being targeted and entirely for political reasons. And it's only on the right where this is happening. This is extreme projection from Democrats right now, talking about weaponizing the DOJ and FBI. This is why I said, I'm already voting for Trump. You don't need to sell him to me anymore. I want to see us turn the tape. I've repeatedly said, and we did a whole podcast where we kind of debated this, right? The whole neo-reactionary take versus classical liberal take. And Nick keeps bringing this up because he really enjoyed this debate.
I
but
did.
like,
Before
I
Trump,
have said repeatedly on this show, on Twitter, and other places in our circle community, the time has come for us to stop complaining about imagining if the roles were reversed, and the time has come for us to reverse them. And the reason why is not because I actually really want to hurt my political opponents. The reason why is because the only way to get your political opposition to stop targeting you is mutual assured destruction. If there's no threat of retaliation ever under any circumstances, and if you've basically adopted a pacifistic take to politics, you will get steamrolled. It goes back to the old Aaron McIntyre quote. The side that wants to be left alone will always be defeated by the side that simply wants to win. And if we want to be left alone, the only way that we can assure that we can be left alone is if we play to win.
Yeah.
Playing not to lose is itself a losing strategy, and we've been doing that for decades now. So, no, I want somebody that will actually use the FBI and DOJ just like they've been used against us, because if we do that, we might be able to get back to the type of America that we used to enjoy, where we didn't have everything done in Washington, D.C. We didn't have constant zero-sum game politics. We didn't have these existential crises where everybody feels like that voting for president determines the fate of the entire country. And we can maybe get back to a federalist system, the one that the founding fathers actually originally intended for this country. We will never get back to that point, though, unless we do to the left which they are doing to us. And for anybody who says, well, I'm worried about the right going too far, the right were literally melting down over firing a Home Depot employee because they were going out there publicly saying that they wish the shooter hadn't missed when Donald Trump was nearly assassinated. And you want to tell me that the danger is that the right might go too far? No, the danger is the right isn't going nearly far enough. They're melting themselves down over canceling somebody on the left who's literally cheering for our own assassination. That's the real danger, is we don't have the stomach to actually do anything to defend ourselves. Yeah. That's the danger.
I think that's because the morality is baked into our worldview.
I think
and
that's right.
we don't agree with going against our morality in order to retaliate and do to them what they've done to us. And what happens is, I mean, how do you fight against a group of people that, like, enough is never enough? Everything is always just a good first step, and there is literally no amount of compromise that you can do that will satiate their appetite for control.
The big thing I think we have to understand, though, is that there is a moral way to fight back. And that moral way to fight back is not just voting. That moral way to fight back is that when you do actually vote someone into power, they need to use the legitimate mechanisms of power for legitimate purposes. And it's not illegitimate to go after the left in ways where they are breaking the law, or in ways which they are manipulating the law. By the way, here's one of the biggest ways you could go after the left right now. Stop financing leftist organizations and objectives through the Treasury. We don't really do that for the right. Don't do it for the left. But that's the crazy part. The moment you say, hey, we're defunding these organizations that have complete ideological capture by the left because they don't serve some sort of general neutralized government approved function, they approve, they're a mill for leftist ideology, and taxpayers don't need to be financing that. Oh my gosh, you're horrible. You're against education, or you're against that, or you're against that. No. We're just, we're going to give the money back to you. If you would like to spend it on this, you can, but we're not going to take everybody else's money and spend it on this. You see how that works? Mm-hmm. If you want to prioritize it, go for it, but you don't get to prioritize somebody else's money for it. And that's the part where we should go in there and we should just be unapologetic about it. Yeah, we're defunding this. Why? Because it doesn't serve a legitimate government function. If you still like that particular thing, feel free to spend your own money on it, but you don't get to spend your neighbors. That's it. All right, couple of super chats here. Connor Querin, great guy, by the way. Connor's awesome. Are there any banks, credit unions in the U.S. that do back their deposits with gold or silver? I only know one in Canada. I'm sure there is maybe something in the United States that does that, or some sort of private investment or holding, but I don't know who they are. Like, I don't know of any major bank that does something like that in the U.S. If there is one, please somebody go into the comments section and say so, but I don't know of one. I don't. But by the way, Connor, thank you very much for all of your work within our community. You've done a great job, brother. All right.
He hosts our Minecraft server.
He
it's
does.
Pretty amazing.
Spectre,
that's what Nick meant by community.
Yeah, Spectre.
What a dork.
I can't believe you just called Connor.
I had to. No, not Connor.
I will say
that's a callback to when Nick called me.
I used to call Christian a dork for playing Minecraft because I couldn't understand why anybody would play such a weird pixelated game. And it can actually be quite addictive. All right, next super chat. Yeah. Spectre701 says, "Welcome back, Christian. If you're still looking for a quippy name, what about Revolution Theist? Revolution Theist
doesn't seem super.
Revolution
doesn't roll off the tongue, does it?
It needs some work, Spectre. It needs some work. What is your favorite period of history? My brother's particularly interested in World War II history. You get to answer this very briefly.
I love the 19th century. The long 19th century, from the French Revolution to World War I, that time period.
All right. Connor also said, I don't believe that it's necessarily the stomach. I would posit that it's a symptom of some not knowing how to communicate and enforce boundaries. I think this is something, maybe this is something else, I'm not sure. With the Democrats, as long as you are a benefit to them with money or political gains, they love you. But when you no longer benefit, they drop you like a hot potato. Barbara, that's actually a really good point. I think it's important to mention that there are certain demographics within this country that used to really associate themselves with the Democratic Party. For instance, labor. Labor really used to associate themselves with the Democratic Party. There was this assumption that the Democratic Party was looking out for the working man, and that's what they represented, kind of the guy you'd go to have a beer with. That is clearly not the Democratic Party anymore, because the political objectives of the left, let's leave the Democratic Party out of it for a second. Leftist political objectives is about the accumulation of power within this concept of an oppressor-oppressed dynamic. And so if you easily fall within the oppressed category, then you're a part of the coalition. The moment you're no longer a part of the oppressed category, you're not a part of the coalition. You're expendable. This is what a lot of working class people found out. This is certainly what Jewish people are finding out right now. It's what a lot of Asian people have found out, is that, I was never a part of this coalition. I was only there insofar as that I could be used as part of the oppressed narrative. And now that I can't be used as that, I'm no longer worth anything to them unless I'm an ally. And then to be an ally means you have to surrender all of your objectives and the things most important to you for whoever's on top of the oppressed pyramid today. And that can change day in and day out. So it's a very good point. All right, let's move on to the next thing that we have here. I want to talk a little bit about a particular woman who's somewhat popular, got up and talked about the frustration and the skepticism and the scrutiny that you should have with people that take more than they need. And I'll tell you what, the person that gave this speech just has so much credibility to give a speech like this, to really talk about, because she's someone that, has, lived her life in such a way where she's really just gotten by with next to nothing her entire. Oh wait, no, that's not true at all. Let's go ahead and look at what
in fact,
was
she
said.
delivered this speech in a $3,000 pantsuit.
Yeah, $3,000 pantsuit. All right,
you're a hypocrite than this woman.
She and my father didn't aspire to be wealthy. In fact, they were suspicious of folks who took more than they needed.
So we should be suspicious of people with more than they need, says the woman with the $12 million 7-bedroom Martha's Vineyard estate. Do you really need that, Michelle? Or what about your Hawaii property that you rent each year from your mega donor millionaire friend Marty Nesbitt? Did you need that? This was obviously some sort of dig at Donald Trump, getting at the fact that he's a wealthy businessman. But the difference between the two is that Trump's never shied away from the reality that he's privileged. No, he takes that privilege and he serves Americans with it, while the Obamas fake victimhood to earn money on American ignorance. You're a hypocrite, Michelle.
You hypocrite.
Okay,
That was pretty good.
That came from our friend. Wait, don't move yet.
Oh,
Don't move yet.
oops.
Gosh, see, this is why we can't have nice things. That came from Chrissy Clark. Chrissy Clark. She's go follow her on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. She does a great job. But no, it's to have Michelle Obama, whose entire portfolio is due in large part to her access to power, political power. The Obamas have not sat there and produced a company which is providing goods and services that we all just love so much that we're sending them money. That's not the source of their wealth. Their source of their wealth has always been the access to power. And then think about what she said real quick, because this is important. Her mom and her dad, they were always skeptical of people that took more than they needed. Took more. See, you notice how the language is? It's not earn more. All of us, arguably, who actually earn, who are net taxpayers, we earn more than we need to achieve basic subsistence. But I can tell you this much: I don't got a $12 million mansion in Martha's Vineyard. I don't get to rent a huge Hawaii property. I don't wear $3,000 whatever. That's not a thing for me. So no. Some people earn more. And that's a good thing. It's not wrong to earn more. And then it's not bad to use that to buy things which actually provide jobs to other people to produce those things. That's not a bad thing. I'll tell you what is a bad thing, though. When your entire portfolio is as a result of how good you were at taking from other people who earned it in order to fuel your political objective. And then you turn that political position into a source of wealth accumulation. And guess what? They've all done it. They've all done it. They're the ones that took more than they needed. They're the ones that took exorbitant amounts. They're the takers. And that's the difference. This whole dynamic right here, please hear me when I say this. This is not an argument between oppressed and oppressor. This has increasingly become an argument between people who work for a living and moochers. And moochers are not all poor people taking handouts. Moochers are oftentimes some of the wealthiest people in this country who accumulate their wealth based off of their access to political power, not their ability to provide goods and services. That's where those of us who work for a living are getting starved out by people who vote for a living. That's the problem.
Somebody in the comments said it's hierarchy, not hypocrisy. And I think there's really something to be said of that. Like, the United States is, within the Democratic Party, moving almost towards this like kakistocracy, the rule of the least competent, least fit, least, most inept group of people. And it's mostly motivated. Honestly, it's mostly motivated out of petty resentment and cruelty at the end of the day, as all forms of communism are. It's not, we're solving. It actually is not a belief that we're solving injustice. It's actually a belief that we're responding to envy. And how do you see examples of this? Well, you see examples of this in the fact that people like Michele Obama, who haven't produced anything, haven't invented anything, haven't served any sort of need of any sort of consumer, but became wealthy entirely through political maneuvering, entirely through, and not even in her own part, and the part of her husband.
Yeah.
And yet their entire pitch is basically a group of very wealthy, well-connected, politically connected elites lecturing the rest of America about their privilege.
Yeah.
Either in the form of racism, in the form of classism, in the form of sexism, and increasingly in the form of whether or not you're here legally or not. Yeah. And at the end of the day, there's always a new group that you can break society down into in terms of oppressor and oppressor. You said this earlier in the podcast, right? It used to be a point in time where certain demographic groups were in the oppressed category entirely for political reasons, and now they're no longer in it. A very good, the good example that I always point to is the white working class.
Yeah.
You look at white working class voters in Youngstown, Ohio, or in Flint, Michigan. They used to be, the Democratic Party built its entire messaging in the late 19th, early 20th century around appealing to those type of voters. Nowadays, they use white, straight male as an insult rather than a demographic designation for a particular group of people.
Oh, but that's all been fixed because they picked Walz as the VP. So now all the
all those voters in Mahoning County are going to vote for him. Spoiler alert, they're not, because here's the thing: all those straight white working class voters realize, no, the Democratic Party is my enemy. They are applying the friend enemy distinction not because they read all the philosophy behind it, but because they've noticed that the left are applying it against them.
Yeah.
You cannot gaslight me into voting for a party that, again, uses straight white male as an insult.
Yeah. Well, they
can't do it.
They look at Walz, who says things like, well, one person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. And of course, this is coming from a guy that set up a law enforcement mechanism to be able to rat on your neighbor during COVID so you could get your neighbor arrested. Right? This is the same guy that lies about his military service. It's like one of the weapons that I carried in combat. Really? In Italy? You went to combat in Italy? That would have been really impressive in World War II. It is not impressive in 2003. This is the sort of guy, and again, part of it is because they don't have any actual respect for these people. They want to trick you into voting for them, but they mean you no good, right? Let's go to this next one here, because this is a funny, let's just say, distinction. Because it's a little bit of a weird thing for Tammy Duckworth to say, but especially...
Tammy Duckworth is the senator from Illinois, for context.
All right, so here we go.
Every American deserves the right to be called mommy or daddy without being treated like a criminal. Every American...
First of all...
What is the context here?
So
this was only like 9 seconds long.
No, I get it. The funny part is the reason why I wanted to show that is because I want to show the next clip. Go ahead and go over to the New York Post. So every American deserves the right to be called mommy or daddy without being called a criminal. And then scroll down. Planned Parenthood offers free vasectomies and abortions in truck outside the DNC. right? So like this was an actual thing.
This is the party that calls J.D. Vance a weirdo,
yeah,
by the way.
The party that calls J.D. Vance a weirdo, the party that gets up there, everybody deserves to be called mommy or daddy without being called a criminal, whatever the hell that means.
I am actually very much for spaying and neutering your local Democrat. I'm very much for that. I don't like the abortion truck, but I'm totally fine with them spaying and neutering. You know, you have to use spaying and neutering, you know, because some women have penises in the Democrat Party.
Okay, so
mostly if you're a Democrat.
So I was watching. I finally got around to do a callback to our debate episode, Nick. I was reading through some comments on the debate episode between neo-reactionaryism and classical liberalism that you and I had. And a lot of the comments were talking about a recent interview that Carl Benjamin had with Tim Pool about a month ago, where he was talking about many of the same stuff. Benjamin famously identified as a liberal during the Gamergate controversy, has moved increasingly to the right, and now identifies, in his own words, as far to the right as you can possibly get. And I don't mean mid-century Germans, I mean traditionalism.
Yeah.
I mean it in a truly classical sense of being on the right. And so he had this sit-down interview. It was like 2 hours long with Tim Pool, and he talked about the problems of liberalism. He was making many of the arguments much better than I can because he's actually read the philosophy behind this stuff. And they were having a point in this discussion that I thought was really fascinating where, you know, because they were coming from different perspectives, but they were finding a lot of it wasn't about a debate. It was actually about finding common ground between the two camps. And Tim Pool was bringing up the traditionalism route. I think that long term, the right is actually in a more advantageous position. And his argument was the reason why is because we're having more kids. The right and especially the traditional right are having more children. And Benjamin's counter is, yes, but the problem is that they're stealing our children.
Yes,
they are.
Yes, through through cultural shaping institutions like arts and entertainment. Like again, please, for the love of God, don't assume that because it's a child's cartoon, there isn't a ideologically driven message within that narrative. There is. It was subtle 10 years ago. It's overt
not subtle
now.
Anymore.
And then if you're going to hand your kids over to be educated by the very people who oppose you ideologically and culturally, don't be surprised when your kids come home and decide you're the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so like his entire point is that it's simply not enough. It's necessary, but it's not enough that the right are simply having more kids, because Tim Pool's point is that, well, the left are sterilizing themselves. Like they're not having kids at all. In fact, the birth rate has just totally collapsed among left-wing people, not just in the US, but also in the UK. Yeah. And to Benjamin's point, like, yes, that's in some ways a good thing that it's the right that are having kids and not the left. But as long as the left monopolizes things like the educational system or the arts and entertainment, they will steal our kids. They will indoctrinate our kids. And so the way that we push back, and to close the loop on this, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this podcast, the way that we push back is through the arts and entertainment. It's through education. As long as we allow the left to monopolize those circles, we're not really going to be moving the ball forward. So, like, we can talk about how weird this is all day long, and it is weird. It is weird that they're promoting vasectomies and abortion clinics at the DNC. But what they're really doing is that they're just living out their ideology. They're living out their lifestyle.
Oh, yeah.
It's a death cult.
They can get away with it because they know that in 20 years from now, they're going to have your kid attending the DNC, going through the exact same type of thing.
Yeah.
Well, this is the party that's totally pro-euthanasia, even if you want euthanasia for somebody who isn't you. You know, in some countries, you have people who their elderly parent, it's time to give them euthanasia. Well, that's actually murder. Yeah. Your elderly parent isn't the one choosing that. You're choosing that. There are certain countries who have bragged that they have eradicated Down syndrome and they no longer have it. Well, no, actually, they're killing all their Down syndrome babies. It's not that they don't genetically have it anymore. It's that they're killing them. Yeah. All of this is leftist ideology. It is a death cult. You absolutely. And so when somebody says, oh, you know, it's everyone's right to be called mommy or daddy. First of all, you can't have positive rights.
Yeah.
Because if it's your right to be called mommy and daddy and you can't functionally make that happen on your own, whether it's because the biology doesn't work or because there is something very wrong with your system and so I'm not hating on people who try and can't. It's more that they don't know where the round peg goes into what hole. So, if you have a fundamental misunderstanding of biology, you still have a right to a baby. What that creates later on is basically Handmaid's Tale, and it's reversed. You're going to take all the people who are nice and fertile still and who can make babies, and you're going to force them to give you their babies. That's the only way.
We had a bill in Virginia this year where they actually tried to create like an open marketplace for surrogacy. And we said, are you honestly, and it was an open marketplace where the broker got the money. And we're like, are you honestly saying that you're just going to set up a price system for like this, just like
pimping out your...
Yeah. And what was funny is the same people, whenever we say, hey, if you're going to voluntarily engage in sex and it could bring about a child, you shouldn't get to just arbitrarily kill the child. Protesters, Planned Parenthood will show up dressed as Handmaid's Tale. They'll do die-ins in the General Assembly. They'll do all this stuff. But then you flip it around and it's like, okay, so at the same time that we have a huge human trafficking crisis at the southern border, which you refuse to address and in fact encourage, do you honestly believe that everybody engaging in surrogacy, you don't believe that there's any connection between an increase in human trafficking and potential increase for the use of human trafficking for the purposes of surrogacy, to where I can sell babies to the wealthy LGBTQ couple who can't have them? You honestly don't think it's like, what do you think there is a greater probability of? Little Miss Handmaid's Tale. What do you think there's a greater probability of? A bunch of Christians roaming the land, engaging in polygamy and forcing people to have children against their will, or a leftist ideology which decides it wants to
forcibly rent your womb.
Yeah. Like, I'm sorry, one of those is more probable than the other.
Not only that, it's like we're talking about buying and selling human beings. You would have thought the Democrat Party would have learned their lesson that buying and selling human beings is wrong.
Well, they get really upset whenever Republicans tell them that. All right.
Well, they did too originally.
Yeah, let's get a couple super chats in here. Free men die free. You have to speak the truth to win. The truth is our political class are robber barons and usurpers. The crime has specific punishments. It's interesting. When we say the political class, obviously there's people within politics that don't do that and are actually trying to fight against it. I'm thinking guys like Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, others among that. We have to compete within the political realm, but we also have to understand again, I'm going to quote Thomas Sowell again. He's infinitely quotable. And he basically said that the reason why so many politicians are such shameless liars is not just a reflection on them, it's a reflection on us. Because when the people demand things that the government cannot possibly produce, only liars will satisfy. And he's absolutely right. We actually have to change the mindset and what people expect out of their government versus what they expect out of themselves, their family, their community, and things like that. And if you can do that, then you can get this back. You can create a very, very different world than the one we're expecting right now. But it has to go back to this idea that the understanding that to be free requires personal responsibility. You're not owed all of these things that you're being told you're owed by politicians. It goes into the positive rights component. There's
another super chat that I think
I'm about.
Oh, I was gonna say No.
Oh.
It's a different one that builds off of this question that you just answered.
Yeah.
And this is from Build Better Burritos. That's a great name.
That's what I could get on board with right there.
I love burritos.
Build Better Burritos asks, why are there so many corrupt people in leadership? Why did the good people not elevate past local leadership?
Oh, okay. So here's where that comes down to. It's difficult. It's incredibly difficult. So I understand something. There's people that go within leadership that I don't think are horribly corrupt or evil or whatnot, but understand the nature of what the position looks like. Whenever you have a small group of people representing very, very diverse districts, interests, the whole deal coming together, you end up having to form these coalitions in order to actually get into a leadership position. So if you look at like the Republican caucus, right, we all vote on who our leadership is going to be. They have to appeal not just to their constituency back home, they have to appeal to a new constituency, which is the caucus itself. And then they have to try to keep that organization under control and moving in a particular direction. And so sometimes you do get people who are genuinely good leaders, and what you usually find is that they have a traction not only within the caucus, they have a traction within popular support. This is the Trump phenomenon, right? Trump has so much popular support that he's able to get away with things that people that are basically working their way up the system through the traditional processes can't achieve. Because institutions, keep in mind, this is what it is. It is an institution. It's a political institution. Institutions set up rules for leadership and advancement, which benefits the institution. So when people take that particular path, there's certain rules, there's certain dynamics that come into play, which make it really, really hard to attain a certain level of leadership unless you're able to properly coordinate and coalition build within that group. And again, some people are able to do it and still remain true to what they believe. Most people, it's very, very difficult. But that's what it is. The incentive structure within leadership, within politics, is built around this idea of coalition building, which a lot of people look on the outside like, well, isn't that what you want? Well, it is if you have an informed society which doesn't want the government to be running everything. But it's much easier to pander to people based off of the idea that elect me and I'll give you the things that you want at no expense to you than it is to explain complex economic and societal principles, right? It's a lot easier to sell stuff than it is personal responsibility, right? That's why personal responsibility is something that has to be built, taught, and instilled at very young ages, because that's where you start to realize the benefits from doing it. But if you've had somebody go through their entire public education, their entire higher education, believing that they're entitled to something and they're owed things, and then you try to teach personal responsibility later, it sounds like a foreign language. And I deal with Republican colleagues all the time that will tell me, Nick, that's great and I agree with you, but if I say that, I won't get reelected. Or if I say that, it's going to cause me problems in my district. And my question back sometimes is, at what point do you have an obligation to explain these things that, look, I can't vote for this because I believe it's bad for you, and here's why. And if you don't agree with me, then let the chips fall there where they may and don't vote for me again. But if you think I'm at least willing to be an honest broker with you and tell you the truth, and if you want that sort of person representing you, not someone that you're going to agree with 100% of the time because no such person exists, but someone that is honest, tells you the truth, and will tell you hard truths when you need to hear them. If that's the sort of person you want to represent you, I can be that person. Unfortunately, we have too many people that have decided that once you get into office, there is this drive to hold your seat. You don't want to lose, right? And it becomes easy to say, well, if I just pander on this, if I just compromise on this, and one day you wake up and you realize that you bought into the lie, that you can't do any good unless you're in office, and the next thing you know, you've compromised on every single core belief you've ever had, and you excuse yourself because that's just what the people wanted. Well, let me tell you something. In a free republic, a representative of the people is not someone that simply holds up their hand, takes a poll, and then votes on whatever they think the majority who answered the poll question want. There's someone that actually studies this, understands it, goes back, and makes arguments to their constituents. You're supposed to be representative because you've told the people you represent what you believe, why you believe it, and what you plan to fight for. And then they get to decide whether or not those values represent them. But if you're just going there to pull a switch based off of whatever you think the latest public polling said, dude, we don't need you. In fact, you're worse than the other side. Because ultimately, at least people know what they're getting with that. There's nothing worse than think you're voting for one thing and getting something drastically different. All right.
It goes back to Socrates' ship of state analogy. In Plato's Republic, Socrates is talking about how you have the ship of state, and if it's crewed by a crew that actually understands seafaring, they'll elect captains that can actually safely pilot the ship from one port to the other. But when instead it's crewed by passengers who know nothing about seafaring and simply vote for a captain based on who promises the best, room and board on the ship, or, to open up all the stores of the ship and hand out all the food for free or whatever, but they don't know anything about seafaring itself, and then they elect an incompetent captain, you shouldn't be surprised when the ship crashes and sinks. And so, if you want to get good captains, you need a crew that understands how to pilot the ship and what are the demands of the captain of the ship, because no captain, especially a large enough ship, can pilot a ship by himself. He needs a crew. Well, but again, it gets back into the only way that you're going to get those competent captains, the only way that you're going to get the type of servant leaders that we used to have, a Cincinnatus, a Washington, is if you actually have a populace that understands what's necessary of a Cincinnatus or Washington. We don't have that right now. We have a political system in place right now that rewards demagoguery.
Yes. Well, and I think the the whole illustration of the seafaring was not only relevant then, I think it's one that people can actually understand now as well. H.L. Mencken kind of actually summarized, I think, what Socrates was saying when he said that democracy is the belief that the people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard, right?
And we're getting it good and hard now.
We're getting it good and hard because, again, when you don't, the whole idea of having to have, I hate it when people just say voting is your civic duty. No. Understanding what it is to live in a free republic is your civic duty, and voting is a part of that. If you are just going and voting without any understanding of how any of this works, you're not doing you or anyone else any favors. In fact, you're a problem. That's why I hate this whole idea of, oh, get out and vote. Yes, I think you should. I think you should take advantage of your right to vote, your ability to vote. But I also think you need to understand that going there and just checking off the box based off of who has the kindest eyes is probably not a really good solution for sustaining a free society. All right, next super chat from Frogger251. Thank you very much. Nick, Thomas Sowell, Thomas Woods, and Victor David Hansen are my picks for Department of Ed. Trump's failure was his cabinet admin. I agree with so much of that. Not only that, I love the 3 picks you did there. Fauci, Metis, etc. Got to pick the right folks. You're right. That Morton Blackwell, who's kind of famous in Republican politics, really nationwide, but especially here in Virginia, he has this quote where he says, "Personnel is policy." If you surround yourself with a certain group of people, they're going to influence your decisions. So you got to surround yourself with good people. What are your thoughts on the fair tax boards? Why do we still have early voting in Virginia? So the fair tax, for those of you who don't know, are generally, it would be something like of a national sales tax. So you have the flat tax, which is everyone pays 7%. Fair tax is rooted more on this idea that you would just have a national sales tax. I've explained this before on why I think, as much as I don't like taxes in general, the sales tax I think actually makes the most sense from a collection standpoint and from a use standpoint. The other thing I kind of like about a sales tax is that everybody has to pay it. So unlike income tax or unlike other taxes where only certain people have to pay it, and so certain people have an incentive to increase those taxes because it doesn't cost them anything, or at least they don't think it does. Sales taxes affects everybody. And I want, every time a politician suggests raising the sales tax, I want everybody in unison, poor, middle class, rich, to be like, screw you, dude. So I like the concept. I will say this, you're not going to get it unless you significantly amend or repeal the 16th Amendment. It has to be done in conjunction. If you get a fair tax, quote, fair tax, well, you still have the 16th Amendment intact as written, you will end up with both, and that's a problem.
You have to ban the other type of taxes.
Yeah. Why do we still have an early voting in Virginia? Because they all put in it. We've always had some degree of early voting. It used to be more of a reasonable early voting where I think it was like 2 weeks or something like that, so people could like mitigate travel, or if they were going overseas and they didn't get absentee.
It's basically, they called it absentee in person before. Now it's actually early voting.
Yeah, now it's like 45 days, I think, in Virginia. The reason why we have it is because they passed it into law when the Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the governor. And since then, we have never had all 3 of those back.
The governor cannot unilaterally change that.
We've had the House and the governor. We've had the governor, but we haven't had the House, the Senate, and the governor. And so you can't do it. If you don't have all 3, it really limits what you're able to do. So that's the answer. I know it's probably not a very satisfying one.
And chances are they wouldn't change it anyway, even if we did have all of the above. I'm not so sure. We've got some people on our own side of the aisle who rigidly stand against just about everything we believe, but they're supposedly on our side. They just need to lose their seats.
Build Better Burritos came in again. Thank you very much. Again, he goes, I think your response to me is why it is so important that you are here educating the public and doing long-form dissections of thought. Thank you very much. We really enjoy doing it. We really enjoy doing it, so we enjoy the feedback as well. We got one more thing I want to go to. Let's drop down to the part 6 there, Christian. We're going to talk about the top 10 kind of, let's just say, embarrassing moments. Is it this one? Yes. All right. This comes from Vigilant Fox. So let's go down. All right. Number 10. We're going to scroll down here. Number 10 is
Vigilant Fox.
What did I say?
You said Vigilant.
Oh, sorry. I've been talking too much, man. Vigilant Fox on X here. Top 10. Bernie Sanders calls out the DNC to its face. Billionaires in both parties should not be able to buy elections, including primary elections. You know what he's talking about. Well, this is part because Bernie has had it stolen from him so many times. But I also think it's funny when, Bernie used to like to call out millionaires until he became one.
But that's also exactly what happened to Biden.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that is the most tangible example. like in real time right now is what happened with Biden. He won his primary.
Yeah. Well, I love this one. Number 9, Kamala preaches it is outdated, wrong, and backward to think more police creates more safety. And then it goes, meanwhile, her convention looks like this. And there is just loads
wall to wall
of cops, right? We said this too in Virginia. In Virginia, the same Democrats that scream about defunding the police, or the same Democrats that say that, more guns don't create safety. The moment there was going to be a large-scale Second Amendment protest in Richmond, what did Democrats do? They pulled state troopers out of your communities. They pulled law enforcement out of your communities, brought them in Richmond to provide protection for them. You know what they also did? They erected fences and walls all over the Capitol in order to contain people. Wait a second. You're telling me that when you have what you perceive to be a security risk, the Democrats' response is more cops, more guns, and more walls? What? So one of them needs to visit the border, right? Like, it's, again, we constantly say this. Christian points this out. It's not good enough to say that they're hypocrites, but I still think it's worthwhile to point out that here's the distinction. Whenever a Democrat is going to come face to face with the results of their policies, when they cannot escape into their gated communities, the results of their own policies, all of a sudden they want the same things Republicans do in order to ensure safety and security. They want the same things. When it's their neck on the line, they want those things. When it's your neck on the line, it's evil, racist, bigoted, and backward, right?
I mean, they definitely wanted something bad to happen there. They wanted one of us to pop off and do something wrong.
It's the left showing up to fight the left at the DNC right now. It's not the right going down there. It's not MAGA.
Oh, no, I was talking about the gun.
It's not dark MAGA showing up in Chicago.
I was talking about the gun protest in Virginia when you were
you
talking
mean
about.
Jesse Smollett is wrong when he said that, they were walking down the street wearing MAGA hats saying, red hats, this is MAGA country.
No, it's not Trump supporters walking around Chicago saying this is MAGA country. It's
Palestinian
pro-Hamas supporters walking around with Palestinian flags saying this is Hamas country. And the Democrats are like, well, they got a point. All right, number 8.
Make 'em mad.
Jake Tapper unexpectedly points out that Tim Walz lied about him and his wife using IVF, sending CNN into a tailspin as they rushed to defend him. This is
never changed, CNN.
Oh my God, CNN. I just want to say,
when Trump said that journalists and the media were the enemy of the people, that was one of the realest things he ever said. And shockingly, the media, actually not shockingly, the media was like, oh my gosh, that's super dangerous for him to say that, calling us the enemy of the people. When you do stuff like this, don't be surprised when people start, again, applying the friend-enemy distinction. Like when you just so blatantly pick a side and bend over backwards in order to accommodate and make excuses for one side and then invent outrage and scandal for the other side, right?
Yeah.
The story's never what the left is doing. The story's always Republicans pounce.
Yeah. The right's react. Well, and again, Saul Alinsky talks about this in Rules for Radicals. If you've never seen it and you want to actually understand what's kind of going on with leftist strategy, Rules for Radicals is a great place to start because he lays out their entire playbook. And James Lindsay also talks about this in New Discourses, where he illustrates that a lot of times the left's action is all geared toward getting the right's reaction. They want the right to react in a way that they can then attack them for it. And so they will do something that just incites us. And then because we don't typically, get involved or do something, when you finally push us to the edge, a lot of times it's either a bad reaction or you could call it an overreaction, at least in the public's mind. The media is all there to highlight what a horrible reaction it was, and then we lose ground. It's one of the reasons why you got to understand what the objective is so you can respond accordingly. Let's go down to number 7 here. New Jersey had a man dressed up as a woman announce the delegates. He then forgets what he wants to say as he gets caught up in his pronouns and Trump derangement syndrome. So this is funny. It's like, he's kind of going off, and instead of saying, the delegates cast so many votes for this, it's nope, we're just going to go off on a stump speech now. Number 6.
This is actually common, believe it or not, where California went last because Harris is from California.
Yes.
It's actually tradition for parties at their convention for the delegates from the state of the nominee to be the ones to go
So
last.
again, if anybody wants to accuse us of just, using something like this for something other that's intended, understand that this embarrassing one is not California. Don't scroll yet.
Okay.
California did not do this as a slight to Kamala Harris. Like Christian pointed out, it is tradition that whatever state the candidate is from, they will pass up their line in the order of announcing their delegates. They will wait until it's the deciding delegates for that candidate to be able to announce it as a kind of a show of respect and support for their home state person. So this is not an embarrassing moment. It's just a typical thing. The DNC crowd chants "do something," totally oblivious to the fact that their party has been in charge of the country for the last 3.5 years. This goes back into the Kamala Harris listing out all the problems, especially the ones really unique to the last 3.5 years, and saying on day one, we're going to address these problems. It's like, first of all, you're already a part of the White House. You could address them now. What about that? Second of all, don't you find it a little bit embarrassing that you're addressing all these problems that it was your job to address during the last 3.5 years? And you could say, well, she wasn't the president. She's still a part of the administration. She went around for the last year talking about how historical Joe Biden's presidency was and what a great job he was doing.
How proud they are.
And how proud they are of everything they've accomplished. And now they're listing off all of these things that they're going to fix on day one just as soon as you give them political power.
But they've already had political power. Exactly.
Yeah. All right, let's go down to number 4 here. Tim Walz hypes up the crowd as he plays the bubbling white dad.
Howard Dean energy.
Yeah, okay, go ahead and hit play on this one. I want to hear this.
He just looks.
Oh, great. It's only playing in one of the small town.
He grew up in a small town, you guys. Small town.
Governor Tim Walz.
See how I guess you're not going to see the whole thing, but like he was dancing around, jumping up and down.
The only thing that would have made this better is if he'd come out in white New Balance shoes with calf high socks. That would have then I would have believed that this is a guy that's out there trying to connect with middle-aged white guys. Oh gosh. Okay. So number 3, Gavin Newsom calls California the great state of Nancy Pelosi before launching a 2-minute ass kissing session for Kamala Harris. I got to say, okay. Gavin Newsom. So Gavin Newsom is arranging himself right now to one day be the Democrat nominee for president. And this is another guy where, again, you see him on a debate stage. He's pretty articulate. He can string a sentence together, which puts him at the top 10%.
And he lies really well.
He lies very, very well.
Convincingly.
He will throw out statistics way out of context in order to try to get people off of their game. This guy is like 20 years into his 10-year plan to solve homelessness in San Francisco. Like, at what point do you look at Democrats and be like, guys, I understand you think he's pretty, right? And look, his chief of staff's, I think it was campaign manager, his chief of staff's wife also thought Gavin Newsom was pretty because she slept with him, right? He had an affair with one of his best friend's wives. Like, I get it. I get that you think he's pretty. Can we at least acknowledge this guy does a horrible job of managing things?
That, and he is also Nancy Pelosi's nephew. I don't know if everybody knows that, but so he definitely already has that political machine behind him, and Nancy Pelosi has always been, good or bad, a force to be reckoned with. For some reason, nothing sticks to her. She's awful.
Oh, it's number 2. Matt Walsh is doing so well on his DEI journey that he was able to get into the DNC and make a surprise appearance on CNN. Look at him right there. Look at him right there. It's Jason Bourne. Yeah. I don't know. There's a movie coming out that he's doing on Are You or Am I a Racist?
Yeah.
Where he's going through the whole idea of DEI and Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi and all this stuff. And again, every time he tried to sit in on some of these meetings, he would get kicked out because people didn't feel safe. They didn't feel safe, and he needed to leave because they didn't feel safe. So he dresses up as what he perceives to be someone that would be welcome into this group. And sure enough, it works, right? A little bit of a ponytail, put some, put on one of those professor style, jackets, and a couple of pens, and everything you're in the group, man. It's the equivalent. This is the same thing.
He changed his glasses.
James O'Keefe. All James O'Keefe does is put on glasses and kind of a gay voice, and the next thing you know, bam, he's in like Flint. This is the equivalent of the people that told you if you carry a ladder with you, you can get in anywhere because people think you're part of a maintenance team. Yeah. And so they would go into movie theaters and baseball stadiums.
Yeah, it's crazy to me how James O'Keefe, he can get, all he does is catfish the gay guys. And they are an open book at that point.
Oh yeah,
it's insane how he's able to do that.
It has been very interesting to watch how you put on a couple pieces of flair, And you usually need about 3 pieces of flair. 3 pieces of flair, and you can get into all of the DEI conversations. And then number 1, a Democrat member of the Chicago City Council comes out against his own party on live TV, saying the convention is failing. His name is Raymond Lopez, and he represents.
All right, let's listen to this.
Democrats winning any new voters at this convention?
I highly doubt it. I think this is all playing to their own base, not trying to recruit new people, because clearly the Democratic Party, my party, is not interested in talking about what matters. How are you going to keep people safe? How are you going to secure the border? And how are you going to deal with the 8 million undocumented individuals that they let in under Kamala Harris's leadership?
Yeah, wow.
Oh my gosh,
You might be looking for a party switch.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a whole separate problem that we've talked about before, but since I brought it up, it has to be said again. Part of the reason that everything keeps moving to the left is because the right is usually increasingly being made up of ex-leftists. They get ejected from their own coalition.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, well, the revolution went too far. No, buddy. The problem is the revolution itself. You just haven't yet realized that. You want to take us back to the 1990s. You don't understand that the problem was not that everything was great until the left just, kind of jumped the shark after the early to mid 2000s. No. The problem is leftism itself is the problem.
Yeah.
And if you say things like, well, I didn't leave the left left me, what you're saying is I'm still on the left. I'm just not as crazy as the current generation of leftists.
Right.
Yes.
That's
and
one
when
of the
the right
reasons why I never want to.
accepts people like this,
Yeah.
and it's one thing to accept people like this. If you've changed your mind, I'm all in favor
but they wanna
of
make them our
accepting
leaders.
people that have changed their mind. A good example of this that I brought up earlier is Carl Benjamin, who used to be on the left and
Yeah.
is now a traditionalist. Jordan Peterson is a good example of this. But the problem is when you accept people like that and you lift them up to leadership and they still have liberal or left-wing worldviews in many respects, at that point, all that you've done is you've diluted the right and you've pulled the right to the left and you've made us less capable of drawing a contrast with the left. This is why people increasingly say that conservatism is progressivism driving the speed limit.
Yes. Well, and I think it's an excellent point that people need to understand that there's fundamental problems with leftist ideology. Right now, there are areas where reasonable people can disagree on certain things, and that's perfectly fine. But there has to be certain core values which actually unite a culture, a society, a civilization. And if those no longer exist, if they're eternally fluid, as it is within leftism right now, other than the accumulation of political power, well then. No, you haven't fully woken up to what's actually going on. You've just woken up to some of the symptoms, but you haven't properly diagnosed what's causing those symptoms. And you honestly think that, well, if we just treat these symptoms, we'll be fine again. No, we won't. It is going to move. It has to move in this direction. There's no other alternative for it. All right, we're coming up on about 2 hours now. I want to point out one thing. First of all, thank you very much for the people that are watching, liking, subscribing, commenting. Did you know that based off of the numbers, about 65% of the people that watch this are not subscribed? So if you want to do us a huge solid right now, you could subscribe. I don't usually ask, but I'm going to right now because I just saw those numbers. I was like, what the heck?
Wow, Nick is actually promoting his
channel?
channel?
I'm actually promoting. I know. I'm a giver. I don't like to ask, but I am asking.
You just have to ask them to show their love
I am,
little bit.
All right, guys, if you're listening, you have to go subscribe now. You don't understand how rare it is for Nick to promote his own channel.
They always give me crap about this. Like, remember this? I was on Tim Pool the other day, and Tim's like, do you want to say anything? You want to let her? I'm like, no, just happy to be here. Like, you don't want to promote your channels? I'm like, oh, yeah, you should probably go. And I was sitting there thinking like, oh my gosh, Christian Tina and Hamilton are going to kill me. Yeah,
That's what we actually love about you is that you're authentic enough that you forget, oh yeah, I should probably like plug my own stuff in.
Yeah, it would have been
He's
a bad
the same
idea.
way when he runs for office. He will go and, talk forever about somebody else's worthiness for office. But if he's got to talk about his own stuff, he'd rather not.
No.
He'd rather just talk about policies, and he never self-promotes, which makes you a really bad candidate.
As we wrap up, one more thing that I want to say on this point is we had a super chat earlier in this podcast about, well, why don't we get better leaders?
Yeah.
A couple reasons, and you hinted on a few of them, but another reason why is because the type of people that would typically make good leaders usually don't want to do the job. Mm-hmm. Cincinnatus is the best example that I could think of historically. He didn't want the job. People came to him and said, you need to be dictator. And I mean this in the old Roman sense, right? You need to be the ruler that has emergency powers to deal with this crisis, an invasion that was taking place. And he didn't want it, to the point that he took the powers, he dealt with the crisis, and then he quit and went back to his farm. And then they called him back for a second crisis,
Yeah.
and then he did the exact same thing. The reason that George Washington was called the American Cincinnatus is because those type of people who will reluctantly take power or authority or a leadership position, but who honestly don't actually want to do it and they want to do something else with their life, those people tend to be incredibly rare in politics. Not because, as Lord Acton said, power corrupts. I actually disagree with Acton on this quote, but rather because power attracts the corruptible. And so for the type of people who just don't find this type of work interesting, they're out there doing other stuff. They're typically engaged in the marketplace, providing value to people. And so that's a huge reason why we have a lot of problems, is because the type of people that would make good leaders, they typically don't want to do the job.
Well, and I think, well, look, I'll even say this. There's a lot I like about the job of being in elected office. Like, I don't mind carrying legislation and talking with constituents about legislation. I don't mind, having the floor debate and going things like that. There's a lot of other things that are expected that consume a great deal of your time to where you have to be totally immersed. And I think one of the reasons why our founders focused on this idea of a citizen legislature, the idea that you would do a term of service and then leave, is that it was meant to be something where you were not only looking for what you were going to do, but you were also looking for who was going to replace you, because this was not a career. It was supposed to be taxing in the sense that you were supposed to have a real job, because that real job helps connect you with the reality of what people are going with. You're not supposed to spend all of your time in the Capitol. You're supposed to spend the most of your time within your district and living in your actual home. And because they didn't envision the government doing anywhere near as much as what it actually was, that was sustainable. Unfortunately, when the government grows to this degree, you have a certain degree of expertise, which ends up being required, which shouldn't, and that leads to a high bureaucracy. You have people that enjoy the trappings of power and want to stay there indefinitely. I know people that they just absolutely love, when they're not in Richmond, they absolutely love going to every single possible meeting that they can, commission, all of it. The thing is that I love my community. I love my family. I like my work, and I want to be able to do those things, and I want to be involved. But there is a sense of guilt when you can't make it to an event, or you can't make it to this, or you can't make it to that. And there's a sense of expectation on people where they're wondering if this is the one event they do all year and you can't go to it because you have 80,000 constituents. They end up feeling like you let them down. And nobody wants to let people down. You don't want to let good people down. But there's just an idea of that's the other side of this that becomes really, really difficult to sustain over time. And you get to a point where you realize, look, I need to get somebody else to do this job because I'm tired, right? And somebody else should come in and do it. And that is what you should do. You should be waiting. Who is the next citizen legislator that is going to do this job? Because you shouldn't become so married to it and so enamored with it that you do want to do it forever. All right, let me close out. Let me close out with this.
There's two more super chats that I think we have to get to, considering that one of them was $20, so I would feel bad if we didn't.
Oh, John Thomas said, maybe Christian can answer this. If we went back to the gold standard today with the amount of dollars in circulation, amount of physical gold we have, assuming we still own it, what would be the price of gold today?
That's a math problem, and unfortunately, I'm not actually great at math. Yeah. Theoretically, you would actually see massive deflation if we went back to the gold standard. But you would probably see like a Great Depression event, because the whole fiat system would implode in on itself, right?
Yeah. There would be pain before. There would be pain with the correction.
There'd be a lot of pain before you get the correction, which is kind of the reason why you see people, including myself, that promote Bitcoin. And the reason why is because I don't think that we're going to just, Thanos snap our fingers and go back to the gold standard. What I think is going to happen is the fiat system will collapse. And so rather than waiting for that to happen, we should be moving towards alternative forms of non-inflationary means of exchange like gold or Bitcoin before that collapse even takes place.
Yeah, look, and I get that people are skeptical of crypto, and there's definitely crypto you should absolutely be skeptical of and whatnot. There's others. I'm skeptical of exclusive ownership of currency by governments. That's what I'm.
CBDCs.
That's what I'm skeptical of. And even not even on the crypto side, I'm skeptical of it on the actual fiat side as well. But here's what I'll say. I think the price of gold will go up astronomically. It would have to, because in order to justify the amount of dollars that are in circulation right now, if it had to be back to something, it would have to by definition it would have to, or there'd have to be some other mechanism. But I couldn't give you an actual price. We'd probably have to really do some research on that. Joey says, keep up the good work. So happy you're in Virginia. We need more like you. Joey, thank you very much. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you for watching. Let me go ahead and sum this up here real quick. Obviously the DNC is going to hit its final time tonight, and we're not going to be covering what's going on during this episode on that. But I think we've seen enough. I think we've seen enough to understand where the modern Democratic Party is, and the modern Democratic Party is one that I believe has been essentially fully consumed by leftist ideology at this point. The idea that you still have classical liberals within the Democratic Party, there may be people that identify as Democrat that believe that. There may even be some people serving in some capacities that believe that. Here's what I can tell you about my experience. I have Democrats that I serve with in the General Assembly who's sitting down talking to them, incredibly reasonable, right? You're going to sit there, you're going to talk about your shared experiences being parents or having kids or serving in the military, and you're going to be able to get along with them just fine. And they are not the ones carrying the legislation that we would consider to be horribly radical. But they also don't do anything to stop it. They vote for all of it, right? They vote for all of it. They, on some level, feel like they have to give a nod to it, even if they think it's a little bit crazy too. And I do know some that think it's a little bit crazy. They think it's gone a little bit out of hand. They're the ones that'll say, Nick, nobody really wants that, but we do want this. I'm like, well, if nobody really wants that, then how come we're not adjusting legislation to address that? How come you're not coming up and saying, we don't want that, we want this? You will tell me this in private. You'll tell this to voters when you want them to vote for you, but when it comes to the position that you've attained to actually do something about it, you don't. And in fact, you vote with it. So I'm sorry. I really feel like elected Democrats within the party fall within one of two categories. The people that absolutely love where this train is going and want it to go even faster for the cliff. They honestly, fully, with 100% of their being, believe in the leftist explanation of the problems within the world. They believe in the oppressor-oppressed dynamic. They believe in the concentration of political power in the hands of people like them in order to fix things. They don't believe in an idea that really trusts the concepts of individual liberty, private property rights. This is not their vision for America, and they want it. That's one category. The other category is the people that, well, quite frankly, maybe they have some problems with it, or maybe they don't want to go as far as their colleagues will. But you know what? They're not the energized base of their party. They're not the thought leaders within their party. And as a result, they get drug along more and more to the left. And so they're either going that direction and they're excited about it, or they possess absolutely no power, grit, determination, or guts to stand in the way of it. And it ends up what happening is those people end up leaving at some point. And to Christian's point, to Tina's point, the problem is we need to make sure that if someone is going to leave the left, they need to understand why they're leaving. And it can't just be the latest, craziest thing they've done. It has to be a fundamental understanding of what the underlying problems are. So if the DNC has taught me anything, it has once again reinforced the notion that the Democratic Party is not the party of working men and women, and it's not the party of women. It's not the party of minorities. It's the party of leftist ideology. And insofar as you talk about leftist ideology and support leftist ideology, well, then yes, they will grant you certain dispensations or protections or advantages based off of your race, your sex, your sexual orientation, your economic status. But ultimately, it's about leftist ideology. That's the cornerstone of what the modern Democratic Party believes in. That's what they're going to advocate. And if that's what you want, well, then you found your home. And if that's not what you want, well, then there's some real problems here. And we're going to have to really discuss what alternatives that look like. But addressing the symptoms ain't going to be enough. We got to properly diagnose the problem so that we can come up with the contrasting philosophies which will actually preserve the best parts that we love about our country. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. We hope you found this helpful and informative and honest. And again, if you haven't already liked and subscribed, please consider doing so. If you haven't liked and subscribed, we still appreciate you watching. So once again, thank you very much for hanging out, and we'll see you next episode.